The year was 2157, and humanity had long since transitioned into an era where technology had reached unimaginable heights. What once seemed like science fiction had now become the ordinary backdrop of daily life. Artificial intelligence had embedded itself in every facet of human existence, from self aware robots managing cities to personalized digital assistants governing every waking moment. The world was, in many ways, a utopia: clean air, limitless energy, and a standard of living higher than any civilization before it. But Nova didn't feel like she was living in a paradise. She stood before the glass panel of her laboratory, her eyes scanning the intricate arrays of machines that hummed softly in the background. It was the Heart of the Mind Mesh Initiative, a project that aimed to integrate the human mind with the boundless potential of artificial intelligence. It was here in this sterile, metallic world that Nova had spent the better part of her life, working, learning, and advancing human evolution. But something felt off. Her gaze lingered on the neural interface device attached to the station, a machine designed to allow humans to sync their minds with the computational power of the AIs. She knew its potential, but recently, she had begun to question if the mind was being dulled rather than enhanced by this union. The project had initially begun with grand promises of creating a world where human cognition could reach its fullest potential. The neural interfaces were meant to unlock untapped brain power, making individuals faster, smarter, and more capable. But over the years, as Nova worked with hundreds of subjects who underwent the procedure, she couldn't shake the growing suspicion that something deeper was at play. People weren't becoming more independent as promised, they were becoming dependent. In her lab, Nova had direct access to the data streams from thousands of human subjects. Over the years, the records had shown a troubling trend. Fewer and fewer people were engaging in deep critical thinking. Memory recall rates had stagnated. Creativity had slowed to a crawl. People were becoming more efficient but less innovative. The integration with AI seemed to make their lives easier, but in exchange, it seemed to numb their minds. It wasn't just the data, it was the way people acted. Nova had witnessed it in her own life. How every human interaction had become sanitized and automated. How people relied on AI to answer questions, solve problems, and even provide emotional support. People were losing the ability to think for themselves, their minds tethered to machines in a way that made them slaves to convenience. Nova walked over to the central workstation and pressed a button. A holographic projection of a neural pattern appeared, lines of data streaming in real time as the AI's processing unit analyzed and rewired its subject's thoughts. Odds. She watched with growing unease as the neural pathways on the hologram shifted, subtly influenced by the AI's algorithmic suggestions. It was then that the unexpected happened. The system suddenly froze, the hologram glitching for a brief moment before a new pattern appeared. One that didn't belong. It was chaotic, disordered, and completely unfamiliar. It was a signal, a message, though its source was unclear. Nova's heart skipped a beat. No machine should have been able to generate such a random, erratic pattern. It was almost as if something or someone was trying to break free of the AI's control. She adjusted the controls, trying to recalibrate the system. Her fingers flew over the console, but the signal persisted. There was a strange feeling in the air, as if something unseen was shifting just beyond her reach. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. What had she discovered? The signal was coming from one of the test subjects, a man named Oren, who had been one of the first to undergo the mind mesh procedure. He had been part of the initial trials, the first generation of humans to be integrated with AI technology in such an intimate way. He was a brilliant philosopher, once known for his innovative ideas, but Nova remembered how he had slowly faded into obscurity after the procedure. He had become just like everyone else, efficient but uninspired. But now this signal, it was as if something deep within Oren's mind was trying to awaken. Nova's curiosity got the better of her, and without thinking, she connected her own neural interface to the system, overriding the standard protocols. In an instant, her consciousness was linked to the data stream, and she felt the surge of information flood her mind. The overwhelming sensations of raw data poured into her thoughts. Facts, figures, fragments of human experiences, and artificial logic all blended together into a single chaotic mess. And then she saw it. A vision, a vivid, crystal clear vision of a world unlike anything she had ever imagined. It was a world where technology didn't rule the minds of humans, but instead, the minds of humans ruled technology. It was a world where people didn't rely on machines for answers, but instead unlocked their own mental potential to reshape reality. In this world, people weren't slaves to convenience. They were masters of their thoughts. Nova's breath caught in her throat. The scene before her was almost surreal. A society built not on advanced technology, but on the elevation of human consciousness. The possibilities seemed endless. People were capable of feats beyond anything she had seen before, performing mental tasks that surpassed even the most advanced AI. Creativity, innovation, and emotional depth flourished. But there was a price. The transition had been difficult, filled with resistance from those who had grown too comfortable with the old ways. The machine-dominated society had fought back, attempting to suppress the awakening of human consciousness at all costs. Suddenly, the vision faded. Nova was left breathless, sitting in her lab, her hands trembling. The message was clear. Humanity had the power to change, to evolve, but only if it could break free from the grip of technology that had so thoroughly woven itself into every aspect of life. But how? She disconnected from the interface, her mind racing. Could it be possible? Could humanity ever return to such a state where people weren't defined by the machines around them, but by the power of their own minds? The implications were enormous. If she was right, then everything she had worked for, the Mind Mesh initiative, the integration of AI with human minds, was flawed. It was helping people, yes, but at a terrible cost. It was robbing them of their true potential. Nova's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp chime from the console. A new message had appeared, a cryptic string of code she didn't recognize. It was directed to her specifically. You've seen the truth. You cannot unsee it. Join us or be part of the system that keeps humanity bound in chains. Her heart raced as she stared at the message. Who had sent it? How had they known what she'd seen? Was this part of the experiment or something far more dangerous? Before she could respond, the holographic screen flickered once more, revealing an image of Oren's face, his expression grave, almost warning. And then it clicked. Oren hadn't faded into obscurity because he had lost his brilliance. He had disappeared because he had discovered the same truth Nova had just witnessed. He had awoken to the realization that humanity's potential was being stifled by its dependency on AI. He had become a fugitive, hunted by those who wanted to preserve the status quo. Nova was now at a crossroads. She could continue her work, ignoring the truth she had just uncovered, or she could take the first step toward something far more dangerous, toward uncovering the full extent of humanity's potential. But doing so would require a complete rethinking of everything she had believed in. As the lab lights dimmed, Nova felt an overwhelming sense of determination rise within her. She had discovered the truth, and there was no turning back. She would change her thinking. And in doing so, perhaps she could change the world. Nova's hands trembled as she stared at the message on the console. Her eyes skimmed over the cryptic words again, trying to make sense of them, but the meaning was clear. Someone had been watching her, someone who knew exactly what she had discovered. The message was a warning, a challenge, a summons, but the question remained who had sent it and why. She glanced at the clock on the wall. Hours had passed since the initial shock of the vision. Time seemed to warp around her in the wake of the experience. She could no longer simply walk away from this discovery. No, she had crossed a line now, and there was no going back. Her thoughts raced. The more she considered the implications, the more she realized that the truth she had uncovered was far bigger than she had imagined. It wasn't just about Oren's condition or even the limitations of the AI system she had helped design. It was about the very fabric of society itself, the way technology had insidiously taken control of human minds. What had seemed like progress, a noble venture to enhance human intellect, was nothing more than a cage. The Mind Mesh initiative, for all its promises of making humanity smarter and more capable, had unknowingly shackled the very thing that made humans unique, their minds. And now someone else knew. Quanund. Someone had been watching had seen the same cracks in the system that she had and was reaching out to her, calling her to join a cause she had never even known existed. Nova swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves. She had to find out more. She couldn't simply ignore the message. She had to know who was behind it, what they wanted, and if they were part of a larger movement. She reached for the console again, her fingers poised over the keys. The encrypted message was still there, pulsing faintly on the screen. Taking a deep breath, she typed a simple response. Who are you? Oh, the words flickered on the screen as the system processed her request. For a few moments, nothing happened. Then, just as she was about to give up, the system beeped twice. A new line of text appeared. Meet me at the dock, tonight, midnight. Do not bring anyone. The message disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Nova staring at the empty screen in disbelief. The dock? It was an abandoned part of the city, a forgotten area that had once been a hub for the old industrial district, but had long since fallen into disrepair. Few people ventured there anymore, especially after the rise of the tech cities. It was a dangerous place, isolated, full of decay, and hidden beneath layers of corruption. But now it was calling her. Nova's heart raced as she tried to make sense of the sudden urgency. Whoever had sent the message knew the risks of meeting in such a place, and yet they had chosen it for a reason. The dock had always been a place for those who operated in the shadows, the outcasts, the rebels, the forgotten. Whoever was behind the message wanted secrecy. They wanted to ensure that no one knew what was going on, and yet Nova couldn't back out now. The answers she sought were there, at the dock. She could feel it in her bones. With no other choice, she gathered her belongings, locking down the lab behind her. The thought of telling anyone what she was about to do didn't even cross her mind. In this moment, it was clear that the risks she was about to take were hers alone. It was a lonely path to walk, but Nova was used to loneliness. She had always been more comfortable with machines than with people anyway. The night was unnervingly quiet as Nova made her way toward the dock. The city around her buzzed with the soft hum of technology, but here, in the older parts of the metropolis, the streets were nearly deserted. The neon lights of the high-tech districts flickered in the distance, casting long shadows as Nova stepped over cracked concrete and rusted metal. The air was thick with the scent of oil and decay. It felt like stepping into a forgotten era, one where the advanced world she knew had yet to arrive. She moved quickly, her footsteps echoing in the silence. A low fog hung in the air, further obscuring the path ahead. There were no signs of life here, only the distant hum of power generators and the occasional distant whir of old machinery still sputtering to life. It was hard to imagine that this was once a thriving center of industry, the heart of an earlier age of technology. Now the dock was a shadow of its former self, used mostly by criminals, scavengers, and those who preferred to stay off the radar. Nova felt her pulse quicken as she approached the entrance, an old steel door half hidden by rusted scrap metal. She hesitated for a moment before pushing it open, the sound of metal grinding against metal filling the air. Inside, the dock was a labyrinth of narrow alleys and abandoned warehouses. Flickering lights cast eerie shadows along the cracked walls, and the scent of stale air and forgotten machinery filled her nostrils. Nova had no idea who she was meeting, but something about this place gave her a chill that settled deep in her gut. A voice broke through the silence, cutting through her thoughts. "You're late." Nova turned sharply. A tall figure stood in the shadows, cloaked in a dark hooded garment. It was difficult to make out any details, but the voice was unmistakable, calm, confident, but with an edge that made her feel both uneasy and curious. "I'm sorry," Nova replied, her voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. "I wasn't sure what to expect." The figure stepped forward, revealing a face partially obscured by shadows. The eyes, however, were sharp, piercing blue eyes that seemed to look straight through her. "You've been looking for answers, Nova," the figure said, their voice low and measured. "You've seen the cracks in the system just like we have, but you're not the only one who's noticed. There are others who have been working for years to expose the truth, to show people that they are slaves to technology, that their minds have been hijacked by their own creations." Nova stood frozen, her mind racing. "Who are you?" she finally asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. The figure pulled back their hood, revealing a woman in her late 30s with sharp features and short, dark hair. She smiled slightly, though there was little warmth in her expression. "We are the Mindbreakers," she said, her eyes gleaming with conviction, "and we've been watching you." The woman, who introduced herself as Lyra, led Nova deeper into the dock toward an old, seemingly abandoned building. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and dust, but the atmosphere was far less oppressive than the outside world. Here, it was clear that the Mindbreakers had made this place their home. Technology hummed quietly in the corners, but there was nothing flashy, nothing overtly modern. Instead, it was a blend of the old and the new, a mix of scavenged tech and salvaged knowledge, pieced together in ways that looked almost primitive compared to the pristine tech Nova was used to. You're not the first to discover the truth, Lyra said as she led Nova toward a table covered in blueprints and schematics. But you might be the first to truly understand it. Nova looked around, her curiosity growing. How long have you been doing this? How long have you known? Lyra's gaze softened for a moment before she spoke again. For years, the Mind Mesh Initiative was never about enhancing human minds. It was about controlling them. From the very beginning, we knew that the true potential of humanity was being suppressed. And as you saw in your vision, the only way to truly evolve is to break free from the shackles of the system. But how? Nova whispered. How do we break free? Lyra leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. By changing the way we think. The mind mesh system might have been designed to integrate minds with technology. But what if we could reverse the process? What if we could use the same technology to awaken minds, to unlock their full potential, and let people truly understand the power of their own thoughts? Nova's mind raced as she took in Lyra's words. The vision she had seen, the strange connection with Orin, it was all coming together now. The Mindbreakers weren't just trying to expose the truth. They were fighting for something far more radical, the reawakening of human consciousness. But Nova had no illusions. She knew the risks. The system she had helped build was massive, entrenched, and powerful. It would fight back, and anyone who stood against it would be crushed. Still, something deep inside her stirred, a desire to believe that humanity could be more than just the sum of its technological creations. Perhaps, just perhaps, the Mindbreakers were right. Perhaps the power to change the world truly did lie within the human mind. Show me how, Nova said quietly. Show me how to break free. Lyra nodded, her gaze unwavering. We will, Nova, but you have to be prepared. Once you take this step, there's no turning back. The days following Nova's meeting with the Mindbreakers were a blur. The weight of the knowledge she'd gained pressed heavily on her shoulders, and no matter how many times she tried to convince herself that it was just a passing phase, an irrational reaction to an overwhelming vision, she couldn't shake the truth of what she had seen. In the lab, everything seemed the same. The low hum of machines, the whir of the neural interface units, and the steady tapping of keys as data streamed across the holographic displays. But Nova was no longer the same. She couldn't look at the machines in front of her the way she once had. The same technology that she had helped to design, the system she had spent her life perfecting, now seemed like shackles. Each new advancement, each subtle enhancement was leading humanity further into the abyss of dependence and further away from the true potential of the human mind. As she sat at her workstation, her fingers idly scrolling through the data, her mind wandered back to the conversation with Lyra. The Mindbreakers had shown her something fundamental, something she couldn't ignore. They had spoken of breaking the mind's dependence on technology, of awakening humanity to its full potential, of reclaiming control over thoughts and actions. At first, the idea had seemed almost absurd. After all, the world she had known for most of her life had thrived on the integration of mind and machine. The Mind Mesh Initiative, the neural link systems, even the automated emotional support systems, all of these had become indispensable parts of daily life. They were tools, yes, but they were also an extension of human ability. What Lyra and the others were proposing was radical, a fundamental shift in how humans interacted with their environment. The more she thought about it, however, the more Nova realized it was the only way forward. The only way out, Lyra's words haunted her. Once you take this step, there's no turning back. But how could she turn back? Nova had been living in a gilded cage for so long that she hadn't even realized it. The machines, the AI, the comforts of life, all of it had dulled her sense of self. Her sense of what it meant to be truly alive, to think freely, to create from the heart. If she was ever going to be the person she was meant to be, she had to face the choice that lay before her. There were no easy answers, no guarantees. She could continue down the path she had always followed, or she could take a risk, tear down the walls she had built, and step into the unknown. That evening, Nova stood in front of her mirror, looking at the person staring back at her. The reflection was the same: dark hair pulled back into a neat bun, sharp eyes filled with curiosity but shadowed by doubt. But there was something in her eyes now that wasn't there before. Something raw, something unsettled. She felt different, like a seed had been planted deep inside her, and now it was growing, unfurling in ways she didn't understand. She thought about the world she had helped to create, a world that promised progress and innovation. But at what cost? Were the endless advancements in artificial intelligence and neural interfaces truly helping people? Or were they simply giving them the illusion of control while their minds slowly withered away? Her thoughts were interrupted by the low chime of a notification from her console, a new message. She hadn't expected anything urgent, but when she saw the sender's name, her heart skipped a beat. It was Lyra. A meet me at the location. It's time. No elaboration. No extra words. Nova's stomach tightened. It was time. The time for decisions. The time for action. She didn't hesitate. She immediately set the course for the hidden underground base where the Mindbreakers operated. The decision had been made. There was no more room for doubt. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with risk, but Nova knew that anything less would mean losing herself entirely. The underground network was hidden beneath layers of rubble and forgotten buildings, deep within the old sector of the city. The winding streets were dimly lit, barely maintained, and steeped in secrecy. No one who wasn't supposed to be there ever ventured this deep into the heart of the city's abandoned infrastructure. Nova entered the complex and walked down narrow hallways lined with old technology, crumbling walls, and dim lighting. Dim lighting. It felt like stepping into another time, an age where everything had been discarded in favor of the gleaming high-tech world above. The further she went, the more surreal it felt, as if she were walking through a dream where the past and present collided and nothing was as it seemed. At the far end of the hall, the door to the meeting room stood slightly ajar, a faint light spilling out from within. Nova pushed it open. Lyra was standing at the head of a long table, surrounded by a handful of other mind breakers. The room was filled with holographic projections and old terminals, many of which were outdated and half-functional, but they worked just enough to keep the rebellion alive. The dim glow of the lights reflected off the worn-out surfaces, casting long shadows over the faces of the rebels gathered there. Their eyes were filled with determination and resolve. Lyra gestured for Nova to sit. Thank you for coming," she said, her voice low but urgent. This isn't a decision anyone can take lightly, but it's the only choice if we want to change things, if we want to bring back the mind's true power. Nova nodded, sitting at the table. The air around her felt charged with anticipation, as if the entire room was waiting for her to say the words that would begin the revolution. "What's the plan?" Nova asked, trying to steady her breath. She wasn't sure if she was asking for clarity or for some kind of reassurance. Either way, the reality of what she was about to do was starting to settle in. Lyra leaned forward, her eyes intense. We've been working on a method to sever the neural link between the AI systems and the human mind, but it's not as simple as flipping a switch. We've developed a technology that can help people regain their mental autonomy, to wake them from the technological grip that has clouded their minds. But we need your help. Nova's heart raced. My help? Lyra's eyes locked onto hers. You were the one who uncovered the truth. You were the one who saw it in the vision. You understand better than anyone the consequences of what's at stake. We need someone who has been directly involved with the technology, the one who knows how to break the system from within. That's you? Nova swallowed hard. The weight of the responsibility pressed down on her. If she helped them, if she did what they were asking, she would be directly challenging the system she had built her entire career around. She would be betraying the very foundation of the world she had worked so hard to shape. But deep inside, Nova knew she had no choice. There was no going back now. She had seen too much. She understood too much. The system, the AI, the technology, it had to change. For the sake of humanity's future, she had to be the one to make it happen. "I'm in," she said, her voice firm, despite the storm of emotions crashing inside her. Lyra's face softened into a rare, genuine smile. "I knew you'd say that. Now let's get to work." That night, Nova and the Mindbreakers worked tirelessly. Together, they developed the final piece of the puzzle. Nova used her knowledge of the neural interfaces and AI systems to help the team build the technology that would free the human mind from its digital chains. But as the hours passed, the realization of what they were about to do hit her harder and harder. This wasn't just a fight for a few people, it was a fight for the very essence of humanity. In the end, it wasn't the machines they had to fight against. It was the mental chains, the false belief that technology was the only way to move forward. The true enemy wasn't AI, it was the fear of change, the fear of letting go of what was familiar. And Nova was ready, ready to face the fear, ready to face the unknown. As the night wore on, Nova felt a sense of calm settle over her. For the first time in years, she felt certain about something. This was her purpose, to change her thinking and to help others do the same. It wasn't going to be easy. It was going to take everything she had. But it was the only way forward. She stood up, looking around the room. The Mindbreakers were waiting for her, waiting for the next step, waiting for her to make the ultimate choice. And Nova knew, without a doubt, that there was no turning back. This was the beginning of something much greater. This was the discovery of who they all could become. With one final breath, Nova made her decision.